Welcome to this compilation of 4 sci-fi short stories about time and multiverse travel. I'll be narrating Stop, You're Killing Me by Stephen Marlowe, Back to Julie by Richard Wilson, Noon by Henry Kuttner, and The Cube Root of Conquest by Phillips. If you find yourself enjoying the stories, you can find plenty more on this channel. So once you're done with these ones, check out the many standalone stories and compilations like this, all in handy playlists on the channel. But for now, let's get to the stories. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Stop, You're Killing Me by Stephen Marlowe, also known as Darius John Granger. Narrated by William Skye. As a private eye, I get a lot of screwball cases, but nothing to match my own, my wife and kid trying to kill me, and neither aware of it. It's funny how a silly little habit can save your life. I got into the car that morning and was thinking of nothing in particular, except maybe the cases I hoped to be getting downtown in my one-man private dick office. We live at the top of the city's highest hill, my wife and our son Sam, who's 17, and myself. At least it's the highest hill in the residential district and the highest one I know of. So out of habit I patted the brakes to test them as the car began to roll down the slight incline of the driveway. The brakes didn't hold. Had I started down Jackson Hill, down the long half-mile slope which levels off at the busy intersection of MacArthur and Houston Avenues, I'd have streaked through the intersection out of control. I don't know what the odds for survival are in such a circumstance, but I'd hate to have to test them. As it was, I shook my head in surprise and pulled the handbrake, bringing the olds to a stop at the foot of the driveway. I climbed out and bent down to take a look at the right front wheel. In a few seconds I knew what the trouble was. Brake fluid. There wasn't any. But that didn't make sense because I'd had the car, brakes included, overhauled only last week. Which meant someone had drained the brake fluid from the olds. I checked the other front wheel and it was the same. No brake fluid. I sat there in the car for a few minutes smoking a cigarette before I went into the house to call the local service station and have them tow the olds in. It was the third time in less than a month that someone had tried to kill me. That happens, of course, to private detectives. It isn't only in the movies and the 2-bit mystery thrillers that it happens. It happens in real life too. I know because I've been in the business 20 years. Go downtown sometime and look me up. Frank Foley's the name, and you'll find me in the Ditmas building on Pearl Street. Sure, it happens to private eyes in real life. They're on a hot case and someone wants them off, and because it's known bribes won't do any good, violence, mayhem, and murder are tried. But that didn't fit the situation in this case. There had been 3 tries on my life. The jets of our gas stove turned on while I was napping over a cup of coffee late of a cold night in the kitchen with doors and windows closed. The pulley of our extension ladder failing to hold while I was up painting the eaves of the house. And now the drained brake fluid. I was on no important case. All of my work at the moment was routine. They say I am getting old, but don't you believe it. I've got some good cases ahead of me yet. They say I was able to get away with my shady tricks when I was younger, but that I'm slipping and can't get away with them now. Don't you believe it. In my business, you've always got to get away with them, and when Frank Foley is all washed up, Frank Foley will be the first one to know it. The situation in this case was worse. The situation in this case was strictly a family affair. All the attempts at my life had been made at home, either by my wife Sue or our boy Sam. Sounds nuts because we're a pretty happy family usually. But there it was. Either Sue or Sam could have snafu'd the pulley on the extension ladder, and either one of them could have turned on the gas jets after I had dozed. As for the drained brake fluid, Sue didn't know a spark plug from the carburetor air intake, but Sam was a hot rod with his own beat-up jalopy and knew as much about cars as anyone since old Henry Ford himself. I went inside and sat down at the kitchen table. Sam was still lingering over his coffee before heading over to the high school. Sue was doing the dishes and humming. She turned around and said, "'Smatter, dear? Something wrong with the car?" "You better ask Sammy," I suggested. "Sammy? But why?" "I don't get it, Pop," Sammy said, still drinking his coffee. The other 2 times I had said nothing. Accidents. You don't accuse your own wife and son of trying to kill you unless you're sure. But the drained brake fluid was no accident. I swept Sammy's coffee cup off the table with my right hand and grabbed the front of his shirt. Sue screamed with surprise as I dragged Sammy to his feet. "You drained out the brake fluid," I said. "I don't know what you're talking about, Pop. What's the matter with you? You ripped the shirt." "Lay off of him, for crying out loud, Frank," Sue cried out. "Lay off of him," I said, repeating her words and imitating her tone. This always exasperated Sue. She put down her dish rag and came over to me and hollered, "Well, you haven't said what's the matter." "I said he drained the brake fluid out of the car. I could have killed myself." "That's ridiculous, Frank, and you know it. Why would Sam do a thing like that?" "How should I know why he'd do a thing like that?" "Why don't you let go of him?" I did so, and Sammy slumped down into his chair. "How should I know?" I went on. "Why either one of you would bollocks up the extension ladder or turn on the gas jets right here in the kitchen while I was dozing?" "What?" Sue gasped. "What did you say?" "You heard right, Mum," Sammy said, staring at me as if I'd just escaped from the 20th century equivalent of Bedlam. "Frank, you've been working too hard," Sue said. "Why don't you take a vacation? We could go off to—" "Oh, to hell with a vacation," I said, but I was simmering down. They both looked so completely innocent it kind of stopped me. Add to that fact that my family had no reason in the world for trying to kill me, and I was almost inclined to believe them. Except that you couldn't change the facts. You couldn't change what had happened. I turned around without saying anything and headed for the door. "Why don't you drop in on Doc Mundin on the way to work?" Sue suggested. I slammed the door and went out to the wife's car and got in and drove downtown. All the way down you could have threaded a needle with the line my lips made. There was one customer in my waiting room when I reached the office. I offered him a curt nod and went by the inner door. "Be right with you," I mumbled. He didn't respond. He was a short, chunky man with hips as wide as his shoulders and a flabby, loose-jowled face but a chest like a barrel. I gave him a double take when he failed to respond. I said, "Well, do you want to see a private detective or don't you?" "I want to see you," he said. Somehow I didn't like the way he said it, but let it ride. "Be right with you," I told him as I unlocked the inner door and moved through the sanctum sanctorum, such as it is. I smoked a cigarette halfway down before I pressed the buzzer to admit him. He came in with the bouncy stride to which chunky fat men are prone. He looked straight at me and smiled as if he had known me for years. "I'm glad to see you're still alive, Mr. Foley," he said. I stood up. "Would you say that again, please?" I asked him. "I'm glad to see you're still alive." "Just what the hell is that supposed to mean?" "Well, let me see. By this time your wife and son would have tried 3 times to kill you. That being the—" I was around the desk before he could finish. I grabbed him much harder than I had grabbed Sammy. Something, probably the lining of his jacket, ripped. "You'd better explain that," I suggested. "There's hardly anything to explain. Your wife tried to kill you by almost cutting through the pulley rope of your extension ladder, but you got off with a strained ankle. She tried to kill again by leaving the gas jets on one night in the kitchen, but you awoke in time. Your son tried to kill you this morning by draining the brake fluid from your car. There now, does that bring us up to date?" I was so shocked I let go of him. I sat down and lit another cigarette with what remained of the first. I watched him brush himself off and settle himself in the client chair. "I can't blame you for behaving like that," he said. "What the devil have you been doing, living in our attic and spying on me?" "Dear me, no. But you see, I know. I know all about you, Mr. Foley. I have to know." "You have to?" "Now that you have avoided death the first 3 times, I'm going to hire you." "To hire me? What for?" I must have sounded so amazed that my visitor said, You do hire yourself out as a private detective, don't you? That is your function, isn't it? Yeah, but how did I know? That's a long story. Too long and too involved for you, and probably you wouldn't believe it anyhow. Look, Mr. Foley, I would like to hire you. I am an inventor. Your job will be to protect me and my invention against harm for as long as necessary, perhaps the rest of my life. The rest of your life? Oh, that isn't very long. You see, I died of a heart attack in 1959. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. You mean your doctor told you you only have 3 more years to live? My doctor? The chunky fat man said. Dear me, no. My great-great-great-great-grandchild told me. And he, of course, knows. Your great-great-great-great-grandchild, I said. Yes, of course. Naturally, the dear boy, if you can call a man your own age a boy, is very upset. He's marooned here, you see. This great-great-great-great-grandson is your own age, you say? Perhaps a little older. I never asked him. But he won't be born for 100 years, I gasped. There was a silence. Then I smiled at my visitor. I had to smile. He was pulling my leg. He did it the best, the soberest way possible, but he was pulling my leg. There would be a place for him on TV, I thought, and said so. But I'm not joking, he insisted. Everything I told you is true, Mr. Foley. Here is what I want you to do. For as long as necessary, perhaps until my death in 1959, I want you to protect me and my invention. I'll pay you $100 a week for as long as I live, plus expenses. 100 in expenses was more than I averaged, but I didn't say that. I said, What do I have to protect you against? Why, didn't I say? My great-great-great-great, I said for him, grandson. Look, Jack, you're talking in riddles. Why don't you spit straight out whatever you want to say? Your great-great-great-great-grandson can't possibly want to harm you because, damn it, he hasn't been born yet. Which leaves us where? Oh, but you're wrong. He doesn't want to harm me specifically. He merely wants to stop me from completing my invention. When he discovered I was going to hire you to protect me, he decided to kill you as a warning to me. He tried 3 times and missed 3 times, so I know you're pretty resourceful, Mr. Foley. I'd feel that my invention and I are safe in your hands. First you say my family's trying to kill me, then you say you're 4 times grandson. Well, which is it? Both. That is, my relative employs mental suggestion on your relatives, using them as agents. They have no reason to kill you, do they? No, I admitted. There. Then obviously it must be my, 4 times grandson, as you say. Will you take the job? I don't know yet, I said. Well, admit it, Jack. I don't know if you're crazy or I'm crazy. Why does either one of us have to be crazy? Can't you simply protect me and my invention, and what kind of invention is it? I asked. I thought you would get around to that. Well, what is it? I had wanted to wait until it was finished so I could show you. One doesn't simply talk about an invention like mine and expect to be believed. When I'm puzzled, I become arrogant. I guess you call it bluster, and often it can see you through pretty rough spots. So despite the offer of $100 a week plus expenses, I said, Either you tell me all about it or we forget you ever came here. Understand? I suppose so, he admitted. Very well then. Just a minute. You haven't even told me your name. It's Haney, Angus W. Haney, Mr. Foley. Now, what about the invention? It's almost finished, Angus W. Haney said. At the moment I can't prove to you that it works, unless you believe my great-great-great-great-grandson really is what I say he is. Whoever heard of her? That is crucial, Mr. Foley, because if you believe he is what I say he is, then you know my invention will be a success. You see, what I am in the process of inventing is a time machine. That was enough for one day, and I guess Angus W. Haney knew it was enough. He gave me his card and told me to call him, and I said that I would. After he had left, I got out the office bottle, which that winter was bourbon, and poured myself a good hard slug, which went down smoothly. It's a hoax, I kept telling myself. It has to be a hoax. But was it? I guess I wasn't entirely convinced because Angus Haney had said that his 4x grandson was using my Sue and Sammy via mental suggestion to kill me, and that being the case I decided against going home that night. What the hell, a guy couldn't take chances, not in my business. You learned to be careful or else you left the business in a hurry or they carried you out. So I'd wait and see. I called up home and made some kind of excuse, then took a room downtown in the Hazel Arms Hotel. I checked in, showered, and went outside for a good meal. When I returned to the Hazel Arms, it was early, so I killed some time at the bar, then went out and took in a movie. At 10 o'clock that evening, I went upstairs to turn in. Kind of an early hour for a private eye, I know, but I was bushed, and I guess I'm not as young as I used to be. I shut the door behind me and was about to turn on the light when a voice said, "After you turn it on, just walk to the bed and sit down, please. I'm holding a gun on you." I touched the light switch and the room was bathed in light and I saw him. He was a middle-aged fellow, but trim and well-preserved with dark, piercing eyes and hair greying at the temples. He said, "I suppose you know who I am?" I sat down on the bed, shaking my head. He was seated across the room from me in a wing chair, holding a .38 Banker's Special very steadily in his right hand, the muzzle pointing at me. "No," I said. "Who are you?" "I'm Angus Haney's great-great-great-great-grandson." By then I didn't even blink. I merely said, "Go on, I'm listening." "I tried to have you killed as a warning to my relation, Mr. Foley. You see, I don't want to kill him. I can't predict what might happen if I kill him. It's never been done before, killing an ancestor. I might disrupt the whole family line. For example, I might never be born. We couldn't possibly have that, could we?" "Not if you say we couldn't. What do you want, Jack, to kill me?" "If I had wanted that, I could merely pull the trigger, couldn't I?" "Yeah." "I'm afraid trying to kill you was a mistake. Angus is determined to go on with his invention anyway. But if I can convince you not to take his proposition, perhaps I'll be able to destroy his time machine before he has time to hire another guard." "But why do you want to destroy it?" "Because I'm trapped here in your primitive age. Because I'll never get back to my own time, that's why." "I don't get you." "Look, my ancestor Angus Haney invents a time machine. It can travel forward in time, but not back. In my own day, I invent a machine based to a large extent on Angus's earlier machine. It can travel back in time, but not forward. I come here, visiting your mid-20th century, thinking I can return to my own day in Angus's machine." "Then why don't you want it built?" "Because Angus explained to me that I was wrong. The machines are slightly different. I can travel on my own, but not his. He can travel on his own, but not mine. Result, I'm trapped here. Unless... Unless what? Unless I can prevent Angus from completing his machine. If it's destroyed, my own machine would have been impossible because, as I have said, most of my work is based on Angus's. You'll help me?" "No," I said. "Why should I?" "Because I cannot stand living in your barbarous age. Because I want to return home to the world I understand." "Hell," I said, "Angus is as good as my client right now." "I will give you," the well-preserved middle-aged man said, $10,000 to help me destroy Angus Haney's time machine. And win or lose, you won't have my family try to kill me anymore." "Win or lose," he said. Great, I got to call him that because I never learned his name, waited for my answer while I did some of the fast thinking a private dick has to do every working day of his life. When opportunity knocks, a private dick can't pass it up. He won't keep his shingle up long if he does, because the work isn't exactly steady. This, obviously, was opportunity. $10,000 worth. And 10 G's in one lump sum looked a lot better than Angus Haney's indefinite 100 a week. Did that mean I was turning on Angus Haney? Well, it's a cinch I wouldn't have been booted out of the fraternity of private eyes for it, because despite what you read to the contrary in the 2-bit Shamus books of noble impulses and motives pure as chivalry, a private eye is for number one, and that's the end of it. "Mister," I said, "you have got yourself a deal. When do I start?" "You know where Angus Haney lives?" He gave me his card. Tomorrow morning. He's working late tonight, so he'll sleep late tomorrow. He's putting the finishing touches tonight on the first time machine ever built. In the morning, we destroy it. All right?" "For $10,000, I said, "I'd destroy the Taj Mahal." It was a cold, clear morning. I didn't call home because I couldn't face the wife and kid, not for a while. I had accused them of trying to kill me, and it was true enough, but they had no recollection of it. I still had the wife's car with me, but she could pick up mine at the service station on her own way to work. I was too excited to eat breakfast. It isn't every morning you start out to earn $10,000. I drove across town to the address on Angus Haney's card. Great was already waiting for me and pacing the sidewalk impatiently. The frown lifted when he saw me, and you could actually see him relax down to the tips of his toes. "I can take care of the machine," he said. "You watch for Angus. If Angus tries to stop me, you take care of Angus, all right?" I nodded, and we went around the side of the house where Angus Haney had planted rhododendron and azaleas. Me, I don't care much for plants. I only know the names because my wife makes such a fuss about them. "In the cellar," Great whispered. "I have a key." "How did you get a key?" "In my own time, this house is preserved as a museum. I simply made a key from the restored model." In silence, we approached the cellar door. A look at my wristwatch told me it was 7:30. If Angus Haney had worked late last night, he would probably still be asleep. The job would be a lead pipe cinch. I watched my companion slip a key into the lock. In a moment, the door stood ajar and I was peering down a steep flight of bare wood steps. Nodding at each other, we began to go down. We stopped short at the foot of the staircase. There was someone down there. "I thought you said he'd be sleeping," I protested, barely forming the words with my lips. "I'm sure he's asleep, but I didn't know he'd sleep down in the cellar. Apparently he didn't want to leave the machine even for a minute." Faint light entered the cellar through the small, high windows. At first I saw nothing but the usual clutter of basement junk, but then, in the far corner beyond the water tank, I saw something which didn't belong. Make that two things. First, there was a man asleep on a cot. Second, there was this machine. For all I know of gadgets, it could have been a super-powered ham radio set. But a ham doesn't come complete with a glass-enclosed compartment big enough for a man. We stalked across the floor, Great pausing to pick something up. It was a length of steel pipe, and with it he wouldn't have much trouble demolishing Angus Haney's untried time machine. This was it. This was my big day. $10,000 for almost nothing. I looked at the plump man sleeping on the cot in front of his invention. I felt no remorse. His adversary had made a better offer, so what the hell could he expect? All at once, things happened fast. Great stumbled over something and went reeling across the room. He was so surprised that he shouted, "But it doesn't belong there! I couldn't have tripped over it! It isn't in the restoration, I tell you!" I didn't have time to point out that the restoration might not be quite accurate, because the commotion woke up Angus Haney. He came springing off the cot, fully awake and alarmed in the split second it took to open his eyes. "You'll have to kill me first!" he cried, moving in front of the machine and preparing to defend it like a mother lion defends her cubs. My companion ignored him, trying to work around behind him toward the time machine. I advanced straight for Angus Haney. "Be sensible, Jack," I said, "and you won't get hurt. I'm bigger than you are, and I know how to fight. I don't want to hurt you, but—" He turned away from me, though, and lunged at Great. I dove at him in a street-clothes version of the flying tackle, and we went down together. Angus Haney was stronger than I had expected. Or maybe it wasn't that. Maybe he was fighting with desperation, because the machine meant everything to him. Well, the 10 grand wasn't exactly chicken feed to me either. If Angus was going to fight back, I had to play rough. I clubbed him across the mouth with my right fist and his lips became a bloody smear, but he kept kicking and twisting and writhing to get at his relative, who stood poised now over the time machine with a length of steel pipe. "Don't!" Angus Haney screamed and rolled clear of me. He was on his feet in an instant and wrestling to get the pipe from my companion. "If I destroy it, you fool," the man who hadn't been born yet said, "I won't build my own version of it and won't be trapped back here in your 20th century. You can't stop me." But Angus, who outweighed his antagonist, had other ideas. In the brief time it took me to climb to my feet and reach them, the metal pipe went clattering away across the floor, and Angus was wrestling his relative away from the time machine. I grabbed Angus's shoulder and swung him round and hit him. He dropped like a stone, and with a whoop of triumph, my companion scrambled after the heavy metal pipe. Angus was down, but not out. I'll have to say this for him, he had guts. He was on his feet again before Great could reach the machine. I'll never forget that scene. For a moment, time seemed to be suspended. Great stood poised with the metal pipe at the top of its arc, ready to bring it down with crushing force on the delicate control bank of the machine. Angus seemed to stop in mid-air as he leaped for the pipe. Immediately behind him was the glass-enclosed booth of the machine, or, and this is important, it was glass-enclosed on 3 sides. The 4th side was nothing but air. I caught Angus around the waist and pulled him back. We stumbled away from the machine and then back toward it. Suddenly, Angus went limp. It was the oldest trick in the book, but I fell for it. I relaxed my hold on him, and as soon as I did, he became a fury. Something struck the side of my head, and the next thing I knew I was staggering toward the time machine. Just as Great brought the heavy metal pipe down. I staggered inside the glass-enclosed booth. There was a loud crashing sound. And then, unexpectedly, a faint hum, a sudden blurry curtain before my eyes, a rolling, seething, billowing mist of white, and a moment of exquisite pain. And Angus Haney's voice from a million miles away. "You're destroying it!" Then blackness like the gulf between the stars, or between the centuries. Well, that's the story. I'm telling you everything so you'll understand. I am not, repeat, not crazy. I'm as sane as you are. Of course, my emotional responses to your mental tests are different. I'm from the 20th century. I know I can't get back. I know a little more ought to be said about my story. Angus failed to stop Great, who completely demolished his machine. How do I know? Because you never even heard of a successful experiment in time travel here in the 21st century? Simple, isn't it? I wish I knew Great's name. If I knew his name and could find him, he'd confirm my story. I know what you're thinking. Believe me, I am not a paranoid. What's that? His name's Haney, just like Angus Haney. That figures, I guess. George Haney. Well, chuck him in for crying out loud. He'll confirm everything I say. Here he is now. Well, Jack, am I glad to see you. They think I'm crazy. They're trying to tell me there's no such thing as time travel, but I ought to know. I come from the past. And you ought to know because you went back there to destroy Angus Haney's prototype of a time machine so you wouldn't build one yourself based on it and be trapped back in my century. Right? Incidentally, Jack, you can forget all about the 10 grand just as long as you get me out of here and convince them I'm not crazy. He stares at me. He's great, all right. He frowns and says, "I could not possibly be interested. I never saw you before in my life. And obviously there is no such thing as time travel." He shakes his head sadly and starts to leave. "Wait," I cry. "You don't understand. I understand now. Of course you wouldn't know. You wouldn't remember. Because if you destroyed Angus Haney's time machine, there wouldn't be any such thing as time travel, and you wouldn't have built your own machine. So you forgot. The episode sort of never existed for you." "I'm terribly sorry I can't help you, fellow." A genuine look of sympathy in his eyes. "There's no such thing as time travel, for everybody but me. I'm the one guy who proved time travel was possible before the first and only time machine was destroyed." He leaves. The head medics confer. I know what they're saying. I'm nuts. Time travel is impossible, so I must be nuts. But we know better, don't we? Back to Julie by Richard Wilson. Narrated by William Skye. The side shuffle is no dance step. It's the choice between making time and doing time. You can't go shooting off to that dimension for peanuts. I don't want to give you the impression that peanuts are in short supply here, or that our economy is in the fix of having to import them sidewise. What I'm trying to convey is that if you're one of the rare ones functionally equipped to do the side shuffle, you ought to be well paid for it, in any coin. That's what I told Krasnow. And he wasn't after peanuts. I'll do it, I said, if you'll make it worth my while. I'd hardly expect you to do it for nothing, he replied reproachfully. How much do you want? I told him. The amount shook him up, but only briefly. Okay, he said grudgingly. I suppose I'll have to give it to you. But the stuff had better be good. Oh, it is, I assured him. And you don't have to be afraid because I couldn't possibly skip with the loot. I'll have to travel naked. I can't get there with so much as a sandal on one foot or a filling in a single tooth. Fortunately, my teeth are perfect. Sweat poured off Krasnow's florid face as he worked the combination of his office safe. His fat jowls quivered unhappily around his cigar while he counted out the bills. 10% was cash in advance, and the rest went into a bank account in my name. I paid off a batch of bills, then stripped and did my off to Buffalo. Honest John Krasnow was a crooked district attorney who wanted to be governor and then president. He had the machine, but he didn't have the people. And because he needed the people, he needed me. I had been to this other dimension, the one on the farthest branch of the time tree, and I could give him what he wanted. Krasnow found out about it after I was hauled up in front of him on a check-kiting charge. I'd had something of a reputation before I got into difficulties, and in trying to live up to the reputation, I had done some plain and fancy financing. Nothing that 15 to 20 grand wouldn't have fixed, but while I scrounged around trying to get cash, I kited a few checks. They pyramided me right into the DA's office, where Krasnow was properly sympathetic. How, he asked, could a man of your standing in the scientific world stoop so low? It developed into quite a lecture, and even coming from Krasnow it made me feel pretty low. So I began explaining. I told him where I was born and where I went to school, and where I had taken my sabbaticals, including this other dimension. And Krasnow believed me. I can't account for it, except possibly because he knew he was a crook and knew I wasn't one, exactly. Anyway, he believed me, and we made the deal, and I did the side shuffle as agreed. The journey to that other dimension is not a pleasant one. It does disturbing things to the stomach, and you see everything thin and elongated as if you're sitting too far to the side in a movie theatre. I got there, however, and waited for the hiccups to subside. Hiccupi laterali, I had called them when I considered writing an article for the medical journal after my first trip. With the hiccupi gone, I stole some clothing, which was one of the riskiest parts of the program, and waited for morning. I didn't have any money, of course, so I had to hitchhike into town. I could have stolen myself a better fit, but people aren't clothes conscious in that dimension. They're more interested in what you are and what you can do. The driver of the car that gave me a lift asked, "And what is your field of endeavour?" I told him, "I am able to eliminate the long wait in ivory production by accelerating the growth cycle of elephants." He was deeply impressed and tipped me handsomely. I was less impressed with his talent for growing cobbless corn, and therefore had to return only a small part of the sum he gave me. The world of this dimension had developed some remarkable parallels to Earth. I mean our Earth, which falls into what I have designated Timeline 1.1, since it's the Earth with which I am most familiar. Every other world that has a language calls itself Earth too. I had to visit briefly hundreds of the lateral worlds, hovering over primordial swamps, limitless oceans, insect kingdoms, and radioactive planetoids before I found one that was truly parallel. It existed in timeline 17.08, and it had refrigerators, platinum blondes, automobiles, airplanes, apple pie, tabloids, television, scotch and soda, just about everything we think makes life worthwhile. But it had its little differences, which was only to be expected in a timeline where the Bionomics could create a new world each time someone changed his mind. Thus, the cobless corn man was driving what looked to me like a Chevrolet, but which was a Morton in his world. He let me off near a downtown restaurant where, thanks to our little exchange of talent talk, I had enough money for breakfast. It was considered unethical to swap talent talk outside the limits of certain rigidly defined groups, so I didn't try to out-impress the waitress. Fed and feeling my stolen clothes a bit better, I walked to the recorder's office and spent the rest of the morning looking up old documents. There was nothing there for Krasnow as I had expected, but for me there was a very pretty file clerk. Talking to her, I verified my impression that human instincts and relationships were much the same in this dimension as in my own, except in the one basic respect that interested Krasnow, of course. The file clerk and I lunched together, and then I spent the afternoon in the library. But I didn't find anything there either, and then I had dinner with her. She said her name was Julie. I told her mine was Hec for Hector, which it is. She thought this was awfully cute, and we got along fine. Julie had a delightful apartment and a matching sense of hospitality. The following day, when she went to work, I stayed home and washed the dishes and made the bed and used the telephone. I ran up quite a bill with my long-distance calls, but I found out what I needed to know. I impressed a lot of people with my elephant story and pretended to be impressed hardly at all with what they told me they did, although often I was, very much. The trouble with these people is that they no longer know how to lie, if that can be listed as trouble. I don't think it can. Neither did Krasnow, obviously. He'd never have sent me off on my expensive side trip if he had. Of course, Krasnow looked at it objectively. What he wanted from timeline 17.08 was not for himself. It was for everybody else. He wanted the formula for the truth gas these people had developed long ago and loosed upon their world to put a stop to wars. They had been in a bad way, although no worse than the sort of problem we were up against. Their transocean squabbles and power politics seemed to have settled into a pattern of a war or two per generation, just like us. Hence, the man who invented the truth gas became a global hero after a certain amount of cynicism and skepticism. All the doubts vanished naturally once the gas got to working. And so did war. You can't do much plotting and scheming if every time you open your mouth to tell a lie you stammer, sweat, turn red and gasp for breath. It's a dead giveaway. Nobody tries it more than once. 1 or 2 men had tried to nullify the gas or work out a local antidote, either as a pure research project or through power madness. But because they had to state their purposes as soon as they thought of them, they were put away. Neat. Very neat. What I wanted was the formula for the truth gas. Its location wasn't exactly a secret in this land of complete candor, but it wasn't writ large on any wall for all to see either. They kept it in their capital, located about where our Omaha is, on file among the vital statistics. I took a superjet out there. I had no trouble posing as a historian entitled to the facts. The gas didn't work on me, you see, because it was adjusted to the physiology of that timeline. There was just enough difference between us for it not to make me stick to the truth. "We'll write out the formula for you," I was told obligingly, "but you'll have to sign the usual statement." "Of course," I said. "Which one is that?" "The one that says you won't publish it and will destroy your copy when it has served your research purpose, without letting anyone else see it." "Oh, that statement," I said. I signed freely, told my elephant story, and departed in an aura of goodwill. The jet got me back that same evening. Julie fixed me up a snack, and we discussed how pretty she was and how nice I was. I had everything Krasnow wanted now. I felt pretty good about it because there was nobody else who could have done the job for him, and because it wasn't spying, really. Earth 1.1 on the timeline is well enough for Krasnow, I'm sure. Besides, dimensions don't have wars with one another. Too many things can go wrong. Julie was lovely, and I hated to leave the next morning, but it was my job. I told her, "I'm afraid I have to leave town for a bit, dear, but I'll be back very soon. Business, you know." Being a 17.08 girl, Julie had no reason to doubt me. "Make it very soon," she whispered, her lips close to my ear. So I came back, and now Krasnow has what he wants. He's delighted, as he should be. I've made up the gas for him and adjusted the formula so that it will work on people of our timeline. It's high-power stuff, and a little will go a long way. I also made up an antidote for him. This was easy, since I could work on it without feeling any compulsion to tell everybody what I was doing and why. Krasnow plans to release the truth gas just before the state convention. He'll be nominated, of course, and after November he'll be governor. With everyone else compelled to tell the truth, it should be a cinch for him. He's a patient man, honest John Krasnow is, and he's willing to wait 4 years for the presidency. I ought to be happy too. With the money Krasnow gave me, I've been living in the style to which I've always wanted to be accustomed. He has offered me a place on his staff and, somewhat superfluously, the use of his antidote. Naturally, the reason he was so magnanimous was that he doesn't want anyone else around who knows his gimmick and might have to tell the truth about it. But I have had enough of this dimension now that Krasnow has what I promised him. He's going to use it tomorrow, and if I know honest John, and I do, not even the presidency will be big enough for him. So I'm going back to Julie. There are some obvious questions in your mind, I know, such as, why did I get the formula for Krasnow knowing there was no way for him to prosecute me while I was in Julie's dimension? And what made me come back? In short, what was in it for me? Let's call it research. Krasnow is a big-time operator. I've always been, you might say, in the peanut end of the game. He had a great deal to teach me, and I'm happy to say, was an apt pupil. You might speculate on what's in it for you, because, if you ask me, anybody who can do the side shuffle should do it before Krasnow becomes president. However, don't go to 17.08 unless you want to swap one Krasnow for another. The fact is that I've learned I can be one in Julie's dimension. After all, their formula doesn't work on me, but I can assure you that it will work on you. And that elephant story I told on my last visit is, as I've indicated, in the peanut category. All Krasnow has is a country. I'll have a whole world. There's nothing like study under a master, is there? I should be back to Julie by midnight if I start now. If you're enjoying the stories, I'd appreciate it if you hit the like button. It helps the video reach more people and the channel grow. Thanks. Noon by Henry Kuttner. Narrated by William Skye. John Weston balks death, but not destiny, when he tries to save Serena, mindless, perfect woman, from the flame blossom. When he looked up from the pool, the garden was different. In the water, Weston had seen the reflection of blue sky and sunset clouds, and the shape of a plane going over. The deep buzzing of the engines had suddenly died. It had been sunset, now it was noon, and he was no longer in Versailles. It had taken months, but the miracle was that it had happened at all. People who search for miracles seldom find them. Yet John Weston, perhaps because he was idle and footloose and wealthy enough to indulge his impulses, had come searching for a phantom and had found it. Dunn had been right, and the theory of serial time could be right, and the authenticated tales of temporal apparitions in the Versailles garden were more than merely tales. The first day he had come here, he had sensed a shifting and a strangeness, but it had passed quickly. Still, it was enough to anchor him here, strolling through the old paths, not quite believing that he would ever again see that face he had glimpsed momentarily through a shimmer of spray. Time-travelling was nothing you could weigh and balance. It either happened, or it didn't. And now it happened. Weston stood without moving, looking around. The trees had moved and changed, and not far away were low blue buildings with conical roofs. Underfoot was a thick, soft moss instead of grass. The pool was still at his feet. After the initial shock of incredulous amazement had passed, he began to walk toward the cone-roofed buildings. Then the second miracle happened. 3 people came out of one of the structures and began to walk toward him. One of them was the girl whose face he had already seen. The others were young men, thin, wearing tunics of shining bronze green like the girls, and a curious vitality seemed to shimmer from them as they walked. As Weston looked at them, he felt certain that this was another world or a far distant era in time. They were almost unbelievably slender, but not awkward or angular, nor were their thin, pointed faces sharp. Bronze-green eyes looked at him. Weston opened his mouth. The impossibility of communication occurred to him. But they were waiting. "Hello," Weston stuttered almost at random. The 3 smiled at him and repeated his greeting. It might have been merely a friendly echo. Weston, slightly stunned, tried again. "Where am I?" he asked. "What place is this?" "This is Jekyll's," the girl answered. "Oh, what year is this?" But this time they looked at him, still smiling but waiting for something. It was very quiet. Leaves rustled somewhere. One of the men turned and walked softly away. "He has work to do," the girl said. "Have you finished yours for a while? My name is—" It sounded something like Serena. Weston had not expected this placid acceptance. He began to explain and question, but the girl interrupted him. "I must get back to my work too." She turned, and Weston, hesitating, glanced helplessly at the other man. There was no help there. Weston went after Serena, feeling baffled. She had gone into one of the buildings. It was an amazing place, Weston found. There were corridors and little irregular rooms and floors like balconies, and all the partitions were translucent like the walls. Lights came in green, deep blue, and ocean purple. When Weston caught up with the girl, he saw that she was carrying a globe of glass. Not until they emerged in the daylight did he see that it was apparently full of smoke, a trickle of it escaping through an opening in the top and drifting back as Serena walked. She put the sphere down on the moss and began her work, totally ignoring Weston. She made fires spring up. Weston was completely puzzled by the method, and simply sat and looked at the flames. That seemed to be all there was to it. Twice Weston spoke to her, but she did not answer. He finally began to explore the buildings. In the end, he was no wiser than when he began, and he had not encountered either of the 2 men. Whatever he had expected, it wasn't this. He thought, why aren't they surprised? Had time-travelling become common, or was there another answer? The noon passed into afternoon and the beginnings of blue evening, while Weston moved like a ghost through that strange, incomprehensible place that was too alien for him to understand. Finally, he saw Serena and the men sitting on the moss before one of the buildings. He went out to them and saw that they were eating. He joined them. It was the strangest meal Weston had ever had. The earth served him. A little pool opened in the lawn at his feet, exactly like an opening mouth. It was full of something like jelly. Weston, watching the others, scooped up some of the stuff in his palms and tried it. It was palatable enough. Then, around the pool, a ring of small green plants pushed themselves up, budded without blossoming, and put out round fruits like little balloons which swelled as he watched. Serena plucked one and ate it. Weston closed his mind temporarily to questions, and had dinner. When they finished, the pool closed and the tiny plants fell to bright pink dust that sifted into the moss. The three aliens sat back, paying little attention to Weston, and talked. "The fires were burning well today," Serena said. "It was easy to handle the clay." "I had a little trouble," one of the young men murmured. "Will you finish soon?" Weston asked, and they looked at him with odd eagerness. "I shall. I think I shall," Serena answered. "How far along are you?" "That isn't my job," Weston found himself saying. "I'm from a different time. This isn't my world at all. I... He stopped because they were looking at him with polite inattention. Then they went on with their talk as though he hadn't spoken. It grew darker. Time in that world was different. Weston had left Versailles at sunset and stepped into noon. Finally, Serena stood up and led the way back into a grove of tall trees. 4 branches were hanging low, and at the end of each branch was an enormous folded flower. The flowers opened slowly. Serena stepped into the soft trough of the nearest and stretched out. The petals folded about her and the branch rose. The 2 men also relaxed in similar fantastic hammocks. 1 flower remained. Weston hesitated, alone in the gathering darkness. He had not had a single question answered satisfactorily since he came here. He had met only acceptance. Even this world accepted him without an inquiry. There were now 4 flowers. Perhaps last night there had been only 3. Serena and the men were invisible in their blossom hammocks above Weston's head. He drew a long breath and turned away. He went to the pool that was the gateway back to his own time, but something stopped him from making any definite move toward return. This opportunity might never come again. He had what he had wanted. He was in another time world, but such a world. How could he find out? In the end, he returned to the 4th flower and lay down. The petals folded around him. There was a sweet, cool scent in his nostrils, a warm rocking, and that was the last thing he remembered. The next day, the 2 men tried to kill him. The flowers opened at dawn, and the 4 bathed in a pool of glowing water that felt like silk, and another tiny crater opened in the moss to feed them all. Afterwards, ignoring Weston's futile questions, Serena went away to her work. The 2 men watched Weston follow her, their eyes coldly interested. By now, Weston knew he must leave very soon. If he did not get his questions answered quickly, they would never be answered. So he kept interrupting Serena at her work, asking what it was she did, what this world was like, 1,000 other queries that apparently meant nothing at all to her. Sometimes she spoke, but only once did she give Weston any real help. Once she said, "You must ask the knowledge about that," and she gave Weston directions. Perhaps it was merely to get rid of his annoying presence. At any rate, he followed Serena's instructions, feeling like an ignorant child in a place of inconceivable maturity. Yet the knowledge sounded very helpful. A library of talking books or pictures or a radio-atomic brain. Weston began to feel rising excitement as he searched in the building Serena had indicated. At first, he couldn't find it. The room looked ordinary insofar as any of those rooms of deep cool light and colour could ever seem ordinary. But after a while, one of the men brushed past Weston in the doorway and crossed the floor to stand before the far wall. In the wall, an oval of shining light dawned. The man seemed to listen. Then he turned and went softly out by another door. The bright oval faded. When Weston stepped in front of it, the panel came to life again. It was the knowledge, all right, and it was the equivalent of a superlibrary. A machine, yes, a radio-atomic brain, a mechanical colloid that was the culmination of the thinking machines of Weston's own time. It could answer questions. Serena's race had come to need a radio-atomic brain because they had lost a certain human factor over the long, long ages. They had lost intelligence. They had initiative. So has a plant. So has a flower. And theirs was the force that activates unreasoning things. The knowledge explained that in answer to Weston's silent questioning. But it was only a machine. It didn't know all Weston wanted to learn. He found himself looking for some human understanding to go with the more than human wisdom it seemed to have, some friendliness, behind that shining panel, and of course there was nothing like that at all. A radio-atomic brain keyed to perform certain functions, but without initiative, to give the humans knowledge as they needed it. Weston got his answers at last. After a time, he stepped outside to get some fresh air. He felt stifled. He could see Serena and the others working away at their unearthly fires, and overhead was the burning sunlight of mankind's long noon. Yes, it was noon. It had been noontide for a millennium. What Weston had expected to find in the future was problematical, but he had not expected this, what the knowledge had told him. He stood there sweating and curiously unwilling to move. Around him were tiny rustlings in the moss. He could hear the flames roar up, and twice he heard a very deep sighing, like a giant drawing the first breaths of life. It was noon. That was the answer. A noon that might have lasted for 1,000,000 years. Weston tried to comprehend it, but he was used to flux. He found it hard to realize that when you reach perfection, by the definition of that term, you can't go up or down. Serena's race had achieved perfection. It had stopped at mankind's midday. There would never be afternoon or twilight, but, Weston thought coldly, in the end, there would be night. It had happened before, he knew. Ants and bees were found in fossil form 1,000,000 years old, exactly like ants and bees today. And the ordinary cockroach is 100 million years old in its form. When it achieved perfection, absolute adaptation to its environment, it stopped. As the human race had stopped too. Noon. Weston looked for Serena. He still couldn't believe that she was what she was. He saw her working with the two men, and amid the fires a giant figure stood motionless. Weston called to the girl. Noon. He knew now the kind of work they did and why it absorbed them so utterly. He knew that they were creating life. Creating it endlessly, hopelessly, in unstable forms that flickered out or were destroyed as they sprang flawed from the fires. He knew a little of the myriad experiments they had tried and found useless. And perhaps, in a way, he guessed why they worked and why they failed. It was clear to him, too, by analogy, what had happened to the human race in the interval between his own time and this. He went looking for Serena presently. He wanted to gaze on her strange, vibrant, otherworldly brightness and try to convince himself that she was what she was. For already he was finding something almost hypnotic about the girl. Such brilliance, such dazzling perfection, such incredible sureness in all she did, without a wasted motion or a moment of indecision. Of course, that was possible to her, as it is impossible in ordinary humans, because she was what she was. Still, he had to look at her. He found her working with the two men, and among the fires he saw a giant figure stand motionless, looming above them. "Serena!" he called. He thought, If I could tell her, make her believe what has happened, perhaps she'll really notice me." She came forward, wiping the flames from her hands like water. There was a look even brighter than usual on her glowing face. "We will succeed this time," she said, and Weston went cold. "Now that you've come, a new factor is made available for us. You! We need you! The knowledge has just told us that if we use your mind factor, we have a better chance to succeed." He looked into her eyes and read the emptiness there. Her hand was suddenly on his arm, tightening. And she was strong, terribly strong. The two men had left their fires and the giant figure and were moving toward Weston. He tore free and went running across the moss, running as hard as he could toward the time door by the pool under the bright, timeless noonday sky. Then, out of the moss, a subtle rustling stirred again, and suddenly Weston felt his feet caught and held. He pitched forward and slid along the ground. When he sat up, he was looking around at a ring of incredible tiny beings, not human or insect or animal. Brightly tinted little beings that shimmered around their edges with an unreal glimmer. As he looked, two of them seemed to dissolve and vanish upon the air. The others, low down in the moss, stood watching with hard, jewel-bright eyes. Experiments. The failures. He closed his mind to the thought. Serena and the two men stood above him, looking down with polite, waiting eagerness. Waiting, he thought, to feed him into the flames and remold his flesh into... Serena smiled and held out her hand. If he could make her understand! Deep panic chilled him. He must play for time. It could be done. They were not really intelligent. He knew that now. He stood up. "Wait," he said. "I'll go with you, but let's make quite sure first. There have been mistakes enough already. Come back with me to the knowledge and listen to what it says when I question it." They came quite willingly. The flock of tiny bright things rolled after them, unreal, shimmering. Weston thought of Eden. The oval window opened in the wall. Weston asked a question, and in his mind and in the minds of the others, an unexpected answer took shape. "Yes," said the knowledge. "You have a factor of the mind that could mean success. A factor I have sensed in the golden light itself, which is the essence of perfection. But the woman here has more. It is recessive in her brain, but far stronger than the dominant factor in yours." Weston spoke to gain time. "The golden light? What is that?" "I am not capable of answering. That is unknown." Serena had not listened. "Will we succeed if I use myself as material in the work?" she said tranquilly. "Serena, you can't do that," Weston said. She didn't hear. She turned and went out, the men after her. One of the men looked back briefly at Weston, and the cool deadliness was gone from his eyes. For Weston didn't matter anymore. Not to them. He could tell that the personal danger to him had passed. And now that he could have made his way to the time door without hindrance, he did not. He had to see what was happening to Serena. So he followed the three. This time he had a better look at the figure being moulded in the flames. It was a man, a giant more than 8 feet high, beautiful as a god and quivering with half-sentient life. But its eyes were blank. The three humans were busy around a new fire they had kindled. Weston stood watching. They completed their preparations. Serena steadied herself on one of the men's arms and prepared to step into the fire. Weston found himself lunging forward, in time. He got her by the shoulders and pulled her back. The men glanced at him calmly, incuriously. The fires seethed up. "Serena, you can't," Weston said. "I won't let you." She didn't answer. His words meant nothing. He could feel the continuous steady pressure of her body as she leaned toward the fire, ready to enter it the moment he let her go. One of the men seized his wrist and tried to free her. Weston was glad for an excuse for explosion. He was on surer ground there. He swung around and struck once at the man, very hard, hitting him on the corner of the jaw. The man was lightly built. He went down in a heap and lay there looking at Weston without surprise or anger, but with a clear intent in his eyes. Weston swung Serena off her feet and started away at a heavy run, carrying her. When he reached the corner of the buildings, he paused to look back. The men had returned to the other fire where the giant figure stood, and they were working on that, deftly and fast, wasting no motions. Twice they pointed after Weston. He put Serena down, keeping hold of her wrist. She didn't resist, though once when his grip slipped, she turned instantly and began walking back toward the fires. Weston caught her again and hurried her away toward the time door that led to Versailles in the 20th century. He couldn't find it. And quite soon, around one of the domed buildings, the giant came walking, unsteadily, tentatively, his eyes fixed on Serena. He was tremendous. He was unsteady because he had just been created, Weston knew, but he came on relentlessly. The enormous hands gripped Serena gently, pulled her free, and started to carry her back to the waiting men. Weston jumped on the giant's back and got a judo hold. Serena fell free, but Weston found he couldn't hurt his opponent. The giant didn't try to fight, he merely strove to escape, and he was tremendously strong. It was even possible to feel, under that satiny, pallid skin, that the muscles weren't normal tissue. They were tougher, like heart muscle. The only reason Weston could cope with him at all was that the monster was so new. He hadn't learned to coordinate yet. He had only that single drive, Weston thought, to get Serena. Nothing in the world could turn him from that. And Serena was walking back toward the fires. It was a nightmare. Weston let go of the giant and ran after her, lifting her in his arms. She lay there lax. There was no use trying to find the time door now. He simply ran, and the giant came slowly after them. Weston knew that he had to increase his lead fast so that he could circle back and hunt for the time door before the giant learned to coordinate. It was burning noon. Time seemed to be playing queer tricks. He let Serena down after a while, but he kept tight hold of her wrist. She had a sort of homing instinct, though the fires were out of sight by now. After a few hours, Weston lost his bearings completely. The world of that time was a park. Nothing changed. The whole world, indeed, seemed to be a highly developed machine for the support of the human race. When he was hungry, the moss fed Weston. When he was thirsty, pools opened. And in all that desperate flight, with the giant looming sometimes on the horizon and sometimes out of sight beyond it, there was nothing except the undulating mossy hills, and one other thing. The golden light. Weston hadn't understood when he saw it. That happened later when he was exhausted. Serena was untiring. He tried to talk to her. She answered when he touched the right chord and she had a response to give, but it didn't mean anything. But Weston couldn't put away the thought that if he could only make her understand, force her to comprehend the fantastic motivations behind her life, she might awaken. The giant was gaining. He wasn't half a mile behind them now. The sun was dropping. It would be dark soon. There's no twilight here, Weston thought. Only burning daylight and then the darkness, as it will be for man. He talked to her. Serena, listen to me. The knowledge told me, listen. I know you're not intelligent, you have a different instinct, but if I could make you realize that... They plodded on. He kept glancing at her placid, lovely face. Call it tropism, Serena. Tropism that makes plants turn toward light, or taxis that guides insects. Insects have a perfect life in a way. Instinct tells them exactly what to do, and they can no more resist doing it than they can help being alive. A stimulus registers on them, and they act as their taxis commands. Listen! That's what's happened to the human race, your race. You haven't any powers of reason. You can respond only to certain stimuli, like automata. like the knowledge itself. If I ask you questions you're geared to answer, you'll answer. Ask you anything else and you won't even hear. Do you hear me now?" It was growing dark. There was no moon, but far away was a golden glimmer of light on the horizon. Weston turned toward it. He didn't know in the darkness how close the giant was, but he could still make speed, for there were no obstacles and the moss was resilient and level. The golden shining brightened as they neared it, but Weston was exhausted. His mind went around in circles. After a time, he began to talk to Serena again. "You're not human. You lost that 1,000,000 years ago. Absolute perfection, yes, your race achieved that at the cost of humanity. Now you don't need machines. A long while ago you learned to harness natural dynamics, the force of growing things. And eventually the technique of mastering that power was born in you. You have it, don't you, Serena? I've seen you use it. So you didn't need reason. You got yourself a paradise and tailored your very minds to fit. So the answer was stagnation, mindlessness, tropism. Serena, don't you see the race wasn't ready yet for perfection? It still had a job to do. I don't know what, but it must have had. Idleness in paradise must have seemed horrible to your race, or they wouldn't have had to sacrifice intelligence to endure it." He glanced again at her calm, half-visible profile. No response stirred there. "You've got to understand. Somebody understood once, a long time ago. The knowledge told me that. A great scientist. I suppose psychological biogenetics would have been his field. He saw that the race was accepting paradise before it had earned it, and so, well, he knew the race was doomed, but he hoped that the search might go on. He set them a job to do. He gave them the job of creating life. That's your tropism, that's your taxis. Your own race is lost and damned, Serena, but you're trying, by instinct now, to create a new race, a race that will carry on where your forefathers lost the way. With natural dynamics and those life fires you kindle, trying for 1,000 years to create a greater race than your own, driven by the impulse born in you, Serena. Ants or bees. Alien. I can't understand you or your race or your world. I have only intelligence. But that's the answer, Serena. I can't let you commit suicide. You'd go back to the fires and walk right into them like a moth. The tropism would make you do that. Serena! Serena! He had been walking in a dream, and suddenly he saw that the light rose directly before them. It was a tall flower of cool, pale flame swaying a little. The shower of gold that came to Danae, it was like that. There were ruins embedded in the moss, as though once a temple had risen around the light. Perhaps it had once been worshipped. It was tall as a man, and it glimmered, and seemed to wait. Weston was ineffably tired, but he knew that a last struggle still lay before him. Or rather behind him, for heavy footsteps came out of the dark and the resilient ground quivered a little, and out of the blackness strode the newest life form the last men had created. Weston pushed Serena behind him. He stood there waiting, watching the reflections of the light glimmer on the magnificent pallid body of the giant as he marched forward. And marched past. Ignoring Weston and Serena, the giant moved forward toward the light. Weston stood gaping. The monster never glanced aside. He was trying to touch the light with big, uncertain hands that seemed to strike an invisible barrier between him and the flame. He kept on trying futilely, ignoring Weston. Serena slipped free and went calmly away in the dark, following her homing instinct toward the faraway fires. Weston was dizzy with fatigue. He went after her, watching the giant across his shoulder. The Titan was staring at the light, hypnotized, trying in vain to touch it with his hands. He did not follow. Weston never remembered much about the trip back. He must have slept on his feet, stumbling toward the moss, holding Serena's wrist as she led the way toward the fires that waited for her. They went slowly. Her patience was fathomless and somehow terrible. Late in the morning, they reached the blue buildings again. The men looked up from their work briefly and then bent again over the figure they were moulding. "Almost ready now," Serena murmured. "No time was lost after all. Soon, perhaps." Then nightmare. Weston had to exert constant effort simply to keep his fingers locked around her wrist. He was looking for the time gate, but his eyes kept closing and sleep washed up exactly like a tide rising, so that twice he snapped awake in time to see Serena walking toward the fires. He caught her scarcely in time. Perhaps the gateway had moved with the time flow. Perhaps he had simply forgotten its exact location. He searched and searched in a dull, grinding interval of aching exhaustion all through that terrible noontide of a race that would soon move on into its night, searching for its own destruction. A dreamy sort of horror grew slowly upon him. The men seemed to be working so fast. Their blind tropism, their ancient inbred instinct drove them. Weston stumbled on around the little pool, dragging Serena. Then he was in the Versailles garden, by the pool again, and a plane was droning overhead, and he still gripped Serena's wrist. He had brought her back through time, from noon to morning. And that was his damnation, and hers. South of Suva, a coral island stands in the empty seas. Once there were natives there, Kanaka boys, but not now. There is a walled garden and a deserted house. Already pandanus grows wild, and the lichen and the swift tropical vines are beginning to devour them both. And there is something else, eternal and alien, that stands on the island untouched by the hurricanes that roar yearly along the trades and loose their fury on the islet. The skippers of a few trading ships know that John Weston once lived there. They used to bring supplies, food and equipment and the luxuries a wealthy man need not be deprived of, even though he lives in the middle of the South Pacific. But no ships anchor there anymore. As for the Kanaka boys, no one pays attention to their drunken stories. And they will not go back. They are afraid. Weston lived on the island for nearly 30 years. He was in love with Serena, you see. She was the ultimate perfection of the human race. As man strives for perfection, so in his own way he wanted Serena, to keep her with him always, to bask in that shining, vital glow she radiated. He couldn't understand her, but he couldn't stay away from her. She had never known grief or indecision or despair. So after Versailles, after he had found that nothing else was possible, he took her to the Pacific island. He built her a walled garden there. She knew how to make the moss and the trees grow. The power to control natural dynamics was inbred in her race. She kindled her life fires, and she began to work again. The man lived on the island too, watching Serena, worshipping her, watching her create life and destroy it. Year after year he watched her follow that single taxis. She answered when Weston asked the right questions, but there was never any real contact. The gulf between them was too vast. She was perfection, and all he had was intelligence. Sometimes he thought of taking her back to her own world, but he knew he could never do that. The two men would be waiting, and the fires would be waiting, and Serena would be ready to sacrifice herself to create the new race that would supersede mankind. Nearly 30 years. She did not seem to age, but Weston did. And then, one day, the end came at last. He unlocked the door of the garden and went in, calling Serena's name. She had always answered before, but this time only silence greeted him. He went down the winding path, and at its end he saw the flame, burning like an unearthly flower, tall, pale gold, swaying in the uprush of its own fire. It lived and burned and waited. He knew then, instantly. Serena was still in the garden, but she was beyond answering. It was success. It was what Serena and her race had been trying for so long to achieve. The new race. She herself had possessed whatever quality it was that had been required. She had, at last, found the right formula for the new life. She was the life, or part of it. Weston stood there watching. He remembered what he had seen so far away in the future, burning in that wilderness of mossy hills. This, then, was why the giant had forgotten Serena and turned to the golden light. The golden light was Serena. It was the new race. She had used herself to create the next step beyond mankind. She had brought it into being 1,000,000 years before she herself had been born. And all through those eons, her people were spending their energy striving to accomplish what Serena had already achieved far in their past. There had been a barrier guarding the light in the future. But now? Had it developed yet? In green twilight the flame burned on. It was new. This was the first night it would illumine, but the mind could not grasp the concept of the countless nights to come through which it would burn. Millions upon millions upon millions of nights and days, while the seas shrank and the tides of time rolled relentlessly over the planet. While mankind found paradise and sank into the long, terribly perfect noontide of the human race. And after that, somehow, sometime, it must waken, for it was the first of its superhuman alien race. After man it would come, and part of it was Serena. "Serena!" Weston breathed. And then he was moving forward, his face bright, his eyes eager, into the alien heart of that living fire. The garden was empty except for the tremendous flame. Its shining enigma glowed through the night. No man would ever know the secret of its power or the nature of the alien life that burned in its heart, dormant, sleeping, not yet ready to waken and inherit the earth, to waken from man's eternal, doomed noon into the bright morning of its unimaginable future. The garden lay silent. No human foot moved through it. Only the golden fire burned like a flower against the darkness. Now there would be 1,000,000 years to wait. Don't forget to hit the like button to support the channel if you think it deserves it. Thanks. Cube Root of Conquest by Phillips. Narrated by William Skye. What actual result is there in the act of conquest? What is its cube root? Jan ran tirelessly, his long, clean limbs carrying him at express train speed across the uneven terrain. The small deer was beginning to show evidences of tiring. Its foam-flecked mouth was open, the swollen tongue protruding over the teeth. The 10 or more miles of the chase had proven Jan's superior strength. The deer rounded a dense patch of blackberry bushes and bounded out of sight over the crest of the hill. To Jan's keen eye, it seemed that the deer stumbled at the instant of vanishing from view. Eagerly, he put on a burst of speed to catch up and make the kill. The scene that burst into view brought amazement into his clear blue eyes. The deer had stumbled, but caught itself and was bounding down the gentle slope. Jan thrust curiosity away and concentrated on regaining the ground lost. His naked feet touched the turf with pile-driver force every 10 feet. The muscles under the tanned skin of his legs worked with smooth effort. The deer was headed directly toward a glistening square spot just ahead. It was in mid-stride when it reached it, its front legs doubled, ready to straighten and touch the ground at the right instant, its hind legs stretched out behind. In that position, it sailed over the glistening square that was set flush into the ground, and vanished. It vanished about like it might vanish around a tree. Its head and antlers went first, followed by the rest of it. One hoof seemed to hesitate, hanging in the air by itself. Then it was gone. Jan turned desperately to avoid the spot and brought himself to a halt a few feet beyond. The hair on the back of his neck felt prickly with fear of the unknown. He returned cautiously to inspect the mysterious, glistening square slab. It was no more than 4 feet across each way. There was no way of telling what its surface was like. About where its surface might be was a soft carpet of glistening, cool force that seemed neither solid nor fluid. It was something like the surface of a glowing ember in a dying fire, smoothed out flat and spread with uniformity over an area of 16 square feet. Jan's eyes pulled away from this fascinating thing and turned to survey what had first caused him to break his pace in surprise. A short distance away, a skeleton of twisted and sheared-off steel girders hinted at what had once been a bridge across a deep gash in the rolling terrain. On the other side was what had once been a huge city of skyscrapers, though Jan had never heard of such a thing and did not know that that was what it had been. With a frown of uneasiness, he dismissed the ruins of the city and the bridge and turned to the mysteriously glowing square once more. The deer had vanished over it. Therefore it must have something to do with the vanishing of the deer. Since he had chased the deer so far, it would be foolish to turn away without investigating. The deer might still be there somewhere. Jan's face lit up with an idea. He looked around until he spied a rock about as big as a fist. He came back with it and stood thoughtfully near the edge of the mysterious square. Then he tossed it with just enough force to carry it across. When it reached a point above the edge of the square, it vanished. Jan waited, but it didn't land on the other side. It had simply ceased to exist. Jan looked thoughtful for a moment. He turned and went back to the patch of blackberry bushes. Taking his long, slim blade from its deerskin scabbard, he cut a long, tough stick, trimming the younger shoots away. With this, he returned to the calmly glistening, mysterious slab. Ready to drop his hold on the stick at the first sign of the unusual, he thrust it part way into the area where things vanished. The end of the stick disappeared. There was no sign of any force creeping along the stick to his hand. He waited, reassuring himself. Then he stuck the stick in a little farther, and it vanished a little farther along toward his hand. He held it that way, his nostrils flaring with tenseness. Then, slowly, he drew the stick back. The vanished part of it returned to sight. It came out and was not changed in the least. He sniffed at it. It smelled no different than it should. He felt of it carefully. It felt normal. Reassured, he thrust it into the area of vanishment again. He pulled it out again. It delighted him to watch it vanish and reappear. He laughed gleefully. The deer was forgotten in the excitement of this strange game in the shadow of the crumbling bridge. Suddenly, the vanished end of the stick jerked in his hand. In spontaneous alarm, he pulled toward him. The stick came unwillingly. Something held it. Terrified, Jan dug his heels in the turf and pulled. Slowly, inch by inch, the stick reappeared. But with it appeared a fat, pale hand followed by a sleeved arm. Jan slapped at the hand and pulled harder. The hand hung on grimly. Another hand appeared, gripping the slowly emerging arm. It fingered its way up the sleeve until it too gripped the stick. Jan let go and sprang back several feet. He hesitated, ready to flee. When he let go of the stick, the hands dropped to the ground. The fat fingers dug into the sod and hung on. A bloated face came into sight and drew back into nothing once more. The face appeared again and stayed, flushed with exertion. Little by little, the face was followed by a neck, shoulders, and a thick torso. The last to appear was 2 short legs. The figure stood up shakily. It was covered by a brown uniform. Although Jan did not know it, this was the uniform of a field marshal. The pig-like eyes in the fat face blinked at him stupidly, then turned to survey the ruined city. Jan recognized the newcomer for a man, though he had never seen one with such a shape. Vaguely, he wondered how such a man could catch wild animals, and if he couldn't, how he could eat enough to have grown up. The man was even more of an enigma to Jan than the glistening square, and he might be dangerous. Jan had wandered far in his brief lifetime. Nowhere had he found more than a handful of other wandering nomads, all like him in build, long of limb, lithe and powerful of shoulder, able to run swiftly all day without tiring. This man, if man it was, came no higher than Jan's heart. He obviously wouldn't be able to run faster than the exceedingly rare short-legged pig that became so fat when it grew up. The man turned his fat face back towards Jan. The look in the small eyes made Jan's hand steal toward his sheathed knife. The eyes saw that movement. They narrowed cruelly. A sneer appeared on the bloated lips. Suddenly, a fat hand darted down to a lumpy object on the man's hip and drew out a squat blue object. It came up. Jan could see a dark hole in it. He stared curiously. Unconsciously, he had drawn his knife as the man drew the strange object. His keen nostrils brought him the smell of sweat that has the odor of a tense body. His hunting instinct told him this creature was going to charge. Jan felt something hot touch his left shoulder. With it came the sound of a sharp report. The strange thing in the man's hand buckled queerly. Jan looked at his shoulder. There was a gaping, angry wound in it. In some way, this man had hurt him. He didn't stop to analyze how or why. The fact was there. He could either turn to run or advance to fight, and he had never yet turned to run. He had learned the trick of weaving in and slashing and withdrawing quickly. This stood him in good stead. The queer thing in the man's hand barked at him, but missed hurting him each time. Jan's knife reached in unerringly and slashed the wrist of the hand holding the spitting thing. The blood gushed out in a pulsating stream. The man dropped the gun and tried to stem the flow. Jan took this opportunity to dart in again and slide his blade across the fat neck. A look of horrible realization appeared in the man's eyes. He turned, stumbled forward, and fell headlong into the space above the mysteriously glistening square slab. The soles of his shoes seemed to hang in the air briefly before they followed the rest of him into nothingness. Jan touched his hand gingerly to the raw wound in his shoulder. It was a day's journey to the healing spring where he could bathe the wound and plaster it with healing mud. His eyes surveyed the scene for a last time, taking in the strange slab flush with the ground, the skeleton of girders that jutted out from each side of the gorge, and the strange heaps of steel and masonry on the other side. Then he turned and started back the way he had come. By the time he vanished over the rise, he had settled into the long, easy trot that would carry him a good 15 miles an hour all the way to the healing spring. Behind him, the glistening square slab rested, oblivious of his departure. The two halves of the wrecked bridge still reached, yearning, torn arms toward one another, and across the gap the ruins of the huge city squatted in silence, coldly aloof. A wind-borne leaf dipped down in coy flight to investigate the slab, and slipped past the veil. The fresh-cut end of the stick Jan had cut formed a white dot on the green carpet of stunted grass. Bright red stained a large spot on the green and formed a ribbon that led to the edge of the square of cold luminescence, the red trail of blood left by the strange visitor from out of the square. And in the clean blue sky, a bright sun beamed benignly over all, ignoring. "My leader!" Carl Grinch clicked his heels softly and bowed stiffly from the waist. His high intellectual forehead, clear blue eyes and finely cut features, together with his civilian garb, indicated that he was a scientist. He was, in fact, much more than a scientist. He was the scientist of Aleem. "At ease." The leader waved a gloved hand carelessly, a cruel smile twisting the harsh face of the dictator of Aleem and avowed leader of downtrodden masses in every country on Amber. His eyes held a gleam of satisfaction as he watched the uneasy tenseness of the scientist. He gloried in a sadistic satisfaction at his power to snuff out the life of one so great, or let him live to serve his leader. "I told you not to come to me until you had succeeded in the task I set you," Generalissimo Hoot Hittel said coldly. "Your presence means that you have, no doubt." "Yes, my leader," Karl Grinch smiled. "Everything is in readiness." "Good," Hittel said. He rubbed his chin slowly, a smile of triumph creasing his face into unaccustomed wrinkles. "Now we can't lose. We will let loose the destruction and let it take its course. After it is over, we will return to rule an unresisting planet. Explain again to me the theory of the device." "The theory of operation of the device is, of course, understandable only by a highly trained specialist," Karl Grinch said placatingly. "You know what I mean," Hoot Hittel snarled. "I'm not interested in what makes it work, only in what it does." "To begin with," Karl Grinch said, "space has 3 dimensions. We live in those 3 dimensions of length, breadth, and thickness. This is called the space continuum. There is also a 3-dimensional time continuum. This also has length, which is past, present, future. In addition, it has width and breadth, which are approximated by the idea of simultaneity to a certain extent. This is not, however, the simultaneity of events coexistent in our 3-dimensional space. All events we can be aware of are in one point in the time continuum which moves along a single timeline. Since there are only 3 dimensions of space, all things must be in our space. It is the time coordinates that determine whether we are aware of something or not. At this very moment, there is an infinity of universes all occupying the same space, but each in a different position in time. They are existing now, but separated from us in a direction at right angles to the universal time stream. Mathematically, these other universes are expressed in coordinates that have the square root of a -1 as a coefficient. Also mathematically, these universes are imaginary, but not in the non-mathematical mythical sense. They are just as real as ours, but relatively imaginary or relatively non-existent. All this has been known by others. They have also known that to make an imaginary value real, it is only necessary to multiply it by the square root of a -1. Then it becomes real. This fact became the entering wedge into the principle that enabled me to succeed in bridging the abyss of right-angle time travel. As you know, many years ago the secret of single-dimension time travel was solved. However, it would not answer our problem. Though it is true time travel, it amounts to nothing more than perfect stasis for controlled periods, and if destruction hits the space the time traveler is in, he is as vulnerable as he would be if not traveling. In order to escape that, it is necessary to step over, so to speak, into one of the imaginary universes at right angles to us in the time continuum and travel forward there. So all I had to do was discover some principle for multiplying a sector of space by the square root of a -1. As you know, I did that. Then I discovered that there are gaps, so that it was impossible to discover another universe coexistent in space without determining the basic equation of the time curve. As everyone knows, both time and space are curved due to the distortion of mass on surrounding space and time. The exact equation for this curvature had to be determined. We knew beforehand that it had to be a cubic equation. Each cubic equation has 3 roots for every value of the independent variable which is in space. It also has 3 roots for every value of the time. Basically, that means that if any primal unit exists in our space, it exists in 3 forms: the positive, the negative, and the neutral. These units are the positron, the negatron, and the neutron. Those 3 are the 3 solutions in space to the coordinates of the existential primal point. But also there must be 2 other universes coexistent with ours in space, but separated sideways in time. They would be impossible to find with the machine without solving the cubic equation of the curvature of our timeline. So you have solved that and contacted one of the other 2 universes, Hoot Hittel broke in impatiently. Exactly, Carl Grinch said. Take me to it, Hute ordered. I want to see for myself. Yes, my leader, Carl said, clicking his heels again and bowing. The bow was lower than usual to hide the gleam of triumph that rose unbidden in the scientist's eyes. The leader stood with military stiffness, looking curiously at the square of glowing force. It was set flush with the wooden floor of the room and seemed to be nothing more than a square carpet of luminosity. Near it was a tripod with a telescope attached. The telescope went up to the edge of the space above the square place and seemed to end there, a tube with no lens in the end. The telescope is pointed into one of the other two worlds, Carl was explaining. Without a physical solid connecting the two, there is no contact. What is the nature of that? Hute asked, pointing at the glowing square surface. It's difficult to explain it, Carl answered. I'll put it this way. Two attracting bodies that are close enough together will revolve around each other, like the sun and our planet Amber. The material of this slab is what I have named tri-matter. It consists of matter from all three universes of our time equation blended into one solid. Before I was able to contact these other two universes, it was necessary to use the machine, which took incredible power to operate for a few brief moments, and had to be so delicately controlled that the slightest vibration unbalanced its adjustment. Once the materials were gathered and blended so they could not be separated, I had a permanent bridge into the other worlds. The machine and its incredible power were no longer needed. You must remember that the three universes occupy the same space, so that spatially they are not separated at all. Their separation was temporal and at right angles to the path from the past into the future. The attracting forces of the atoms had to be directed across this plane of time by the machine. When that took place, the materials had to be brought together so that the three substances blended would cohere. Once they were brought into that state, the bridge was established. The bridge is anchored at this end in the matter of our universe, and at the other two ends in the matter of those universes, just as the bridge above this building is anchored on this side to the matter of the bank of this side of the river, and on the other side to the matter there. And you just have to walk across? Hute asked. That's all there is to it, Carl replied casually. And, Hute's eyes took on a crafty gleam, a time machine in one of these other universes could carry me to any point in the future without danger it might have encountered in this one, such as an atom bomb dropped on the space it would have been in here. That's correct, Carl agreed. If you will look through the telescope, you will see my aids already nearing completion on the time machine. Hute placed his eyes to the telescope. The scene that appeared was quite a normal one. The landscaping was different in many ways. The vegetation was prolific and of strange forms, but for a considerable area the ground was flat, meeting the surface of the ordinary world only at the one spot where the tri-matter block was anchored. A dozen workmen were busy on the conventional time machine. Hute could see that a few more days would see it completed. He took his eyes away, satisfied. The leader stood before the intricate panel. It was located in a deep subterranean room, safe from all attack. He knew that there were other similar panels in countries all over the planet, different only in one respect. The hundreds of buttons on his panel were set to send robot rockets roaring toward predetermined targets. In a second, he could end the long war by a rapid series of pushes of buttons. The enemy could do the same, wiping out his own country, Alim. These panels had been constructed by international agreement so that every country could know that it would be suicide to use atom bombs in war. Suicide for all. Afterwards there would be nothing but isolated bands of wandering savages without the rudiments of civilization. A few generations after such a holocaust, these wandering bands would lose all ability to learn. The art of reading would be forgotten. The past would be forgotten or distorted into legends of a god race. If that happened, so much the better. When he reappeared again in the world, he would be accepted as a god. With his superior knowledge and with modern weapons to back his authority, he could be in reality the world leader he had to be to fulfill his insatiable ambitions. The war was stalemated. Soon the tide would turn and the enemy would gain the advantage. His hold on Aleem would weaken. If he survived the defeat he knew must come, he would be tried as a war criminal according to the war code set up 10 centuries before, and executed. A few minutes of exertion pushing buttons, a hasty trip to the trimatter slab, and over into the time machine that was set to return him to normal time rate after 3 centuries, and he would be in a position to rule the world. He contemplated the terrific cost. 1.5 billion people would be killed in the space of a few hours. 200 million of them would be his own state slaves, his subjects. His heart would feel the burden of that awful responsibility. No ordinary man was capable of deciding the good of the world for all future time with strict impartiality and willingness to sacrifice one whole generation so that world peace might come. No ordinary man had a great enough soul to carry the burden of the great responsibility. The ordinary man quaked with pangs of conscience at the murder of a single person. He, Hute, had many times had to decide on mass executions for the good of the whole. He had tried, as other great leaders before him, to bring about permanent world peace by the forging of one world government, supreme and controlled by one man, unified under one dominant will. Too few people could see that such was the only path to peace. On any other course there would always be would-be leaders who would try to set themselves up in authority. On any other course, world planning would be stalemated by the eternal bickering and disagreement among nations and self-anointed saviors of the common man. Only in the unified world state could competition be entirely eliminated and world planning become a reality. Hute, standing before the control board, squared his heavy shoulders manfully, jutted his strong jaw out at a dominant angle, and spoke to the silent walls as he had often spoken to the masses. "If I fail to have the courage to do this thing, then the welfare of all future generations will be on my shoulders. The sacrifice of the 1 billion or 2 now living is a small price to pay compared to the sacrifice of countless billions of future generations if I weaken. If I weaken." The thought of what would happen, the war crimes trial, the ignominy of death as a war criminal at the hands of fools who couldn't understand the noble, selfless motives that governed his life and caused him to sacrifice the comforts of home and normalcy as a public servant, and the purpose, the goal toward which he strove, gave him the courage to press the first button. With that simple act, the fate of Tranks Ural was directly sealed, and with it the retaliation against his own country. That knowledge made easy the pressing of the other buttons. When it was finished, he walked stiffly from the room and took the elevator to the surface. His general staff awaited him. They stood awkwardly, faces pale in this historic moment. He nodded imperceptibly to signify that the deed was done. A few dry throats swallowed loudly in the hush of imminent death. Hute Hittle marched stiffly through the passive group. One after another fell in behind him. The procession marched down to waiting cars. The cars crossed the bridge. There they stopped. As one man, the leader and his general staff looked back at the great city they loved so well. The sacrifice they were making for the good of humanity pressed heavily on their hearts. With bowed heads, they turned back and went down the path to the research building. Carl Grinch and his science aides were waiting. They paled at the knowledge that the deed was done and there was no turning back now. Hute placed a fond hand on Carl's shoulder. "Are you sure you don't want to come with me?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion. "The success of the plan depends on my staying," Carl replied, his voice shaken with the emotion of the moment. "The time machine is constructed in connection with the trimatter block so that nothing in either of the other 2 universes can enter it. After you enter, it must be sealed from this side for the period of time travel so that nothing can enter from this side until it is time for you to come back. I and my aides must remain to do that." "Your sacrifice is greater than mine," Hute said simply. "It is very little compared to what you are sacrificing," Carl said, smiling, with a trace of amused contempt carefully hidden in the back of his eyes. Hute took his hand from Carl's shoulder and gravely shook hands with Carl's aides. It was his simple gesture of reward for their great sacrifice. They would die with the gratifying knowledge that the leader himself had taken their hand and shaken it in gratitude at a service well performed. Then he squared his massive shoulders and stepped onto the tri-matter slab, and vanished. One by one the members of his general staff followed. When the last of them stepped into thin air above the softly glowing square, Carl walked over to a switchboard and pulled the disconnects that broke the surge of power playing over the room. His pale assistants watched, hypnotized. Carl smiled at them encouragingly. He glanced at his watch and estimated the time left. "Another hour at the most now," he said quietly. "It could come any second." The wooden walls of the room closed them in with brooding foreboding. A heavily barred window brought a view of the steel bridge that led to the city. A large clock on the wall became the center of attention. A red second hand moved with slowly deliberate swiftness around the dial. And in the center of the waiting group, the luminous square built flush with the wooden floor waited too, its face inscrutable, its substance anchored in 3 roots of being. An electrical tension was building up around the hushed group of scientists. Vague stirrings of cold light rippled the surface of the square block of tri-matter. "The cleavage is beginning," Carl said quietly. "When I say the word, step through. The entropy shift must be just right, or we'll find ourselves with Hittel and his gang. Now!" As one man, the group stepped onto the block and vanished. An instant later, the Holocaust broke loose. Carl Grinch stood before the tribunal of the United Nations of the planet Amber. Video cameras pointed at him from every direction. The audience room was filled to overflowing with officials, and over the whole planet people had paused in their work to watch him and listen to his words. "We of Elim," he was saying, "dared not openly defy Hute Hittel. He was too strongly entrenched. Unless we obeyed his orders to the letter, we were executed, and a dead man cannot serve the interests of all Amber. My researchers gave me the plan I had been looking for. As you all know, time travel was discovered many centuries ago. It amounted to nothing more than perfect stasis. A person could travel forward in time to any period, but not backward. The time machine, in marching forward, existed at every instant and was therefore always present to the view of outsiders. My researches made possible sideways travel in time. By means of a device that used fabulous amounts of power, I was able to gather matter from 2 other universes existing in the same space as our own, but with different time coordinates. I proved to Hittel that in one of these other universes he could escape the destruction he planned, and then return to a torn world and fulfill his destiny as ruler of the planet. I told him nothing but the truth. Because of that, he believed me. If I had told him one lie, he would have seen through the whole thing. In order for you to understand just what happened and why Amber was not destroyed when he pressed the buttons that started the atom bombs on their journeys of destruction, I must tell you a little of the basic nature of reality. Our universe is at all times and in every respect a root of a cubic equation. It has long been known that space is curved. Being curved, it is not the expression of linear equations, but of equations of some higher order. It had never been determined if that order was quadratic, cubic, or higher. I determined that it was cubic. To tell you how I solved the constant of the equation would be to go into material too complicated for any but the expert, so I'll skip that. When I solved that, though, I was able to calculate the field necessary to create a bridge from this root of the equation to the other 2, gather substances from those 2, blend the substances, and create a natural bridge. I did that. But, instead of blending substance from our own universe with the other two, I kept the field going. The field acted as a bridge, and when the disconnects were broken, that bridge vanished, leaving only a bridge between the other two universes. Now, while the field lasted, all three roots were blended into the whole, or cubic equation. In plain language, all three universes within the limits of the field were identical. So it was a simple matter to get Hute and his general staff to carry out their plans in one of the other universes rather than this one, and then escape into a time machine in the third universe. After they did that, I merely pulled the disconnects and destroyed the field that linked our universe temporarily with the one where the destruction went on according to plan. When Hittel and his men wake up a few centuries from now, they will find that things went according to plan. They will find their destruction and their bands of savages to rule, if they can rule them. But their threat to us is gone. We are rid of them for good. The chairman cleared his throat importantly as Carl paused. But what of the people in this other universe? The ones who were destroyed by the bombs let loose there? And their descendants who will survive until the day Hittel returns to force his will on them? Carl smiled broadly. They were destroyed, sir, he answered, according to plan. That is the truth. But it isn't all of the truth. You see, the cubic equation that connects this universe of ours with the other two has only one real root. The other two are imaginary. That is what I didn't tell Hittel. The number 1 is a cube root of itself and represents our own universe. The field set up by the machine was literally another cube root of one acting on our universe as a factor, transposing its forms into an imaginary universe. There Hittel succeeded in his conquest of all amber. It was not the conquest he figured on, however, because events are merely single values that fit the cubic equation, never the equation itself. What Hittel did not know was that no one can ever succeed at conquest, but only at what might more accurately be termed the cube root of conquest. And in his case, that cube root of conquest was imaginary, represented by the number a -1/2 plus the square root of a -3/4. Cube that quantity yourself. You will get 1 for the answer. Square that quantity, and you will get the third cube root of unity. Blend or multiply the two together, and you get unity, which is reality in our plane of the omniverse. Multiply unity by one of the two imaginary cube roots of 1, and you transform the one, or our reality, into an imaginary plane. Try it. Get a piece of paper and work it for yourself. And study the metaphysical applications of the relationships of the 3 cube roots of unity, the relationship of mind, imagination, and reality, the relationships of the positive, the negative, and the neutral units of matter, and wonder. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed these stories, there are hundreds more on the channel. Go check out the playlists of standalone stories and compilations like this one. And I'd love it if you shared your thoughts, memories, and ideas about these stories in the comments. I really love hearing which ones you enjoyed most, if it's the first time listening to them, or if you enjoyed them when they first came out. For now, see you in the next one.